I've just got a lot of programs crashing at the moment, so I'm just wondering whether if we actually launch into this, one of them is going to be us. You know what I mean? It's weird, isn't it? What's the Control-Alt-Delete thing from Mac? Do you know what that is? I just restarted this thing as well. You don't use Macs, do you?
No.
Okay, and welcome back then to Fast Jet Performance, and I'm Tim Davies. I'm here with a good friend of mine, in fact my only friend probably, and if you don't want to count pets, a guy called Chris Chambers. Chris, just briefly then, why are you on my podcast?
Good morning, Tim. Hello. I'm here to talk about, me, but also my experience from being in the armed forces, specifically the Royal Navy and the Fleet Air Arm, but also about transitioning from a life in the military to the outside world. I went into business and I now run a business. And so I guess we're perhaps going to talk about that journey and all the aspects involved.
Yeah, it's always a bit weird, that beginning bit, isn't it? As I said to you, I have to kind of introduce you, although I've known you for ages. And it's like, but no one else, on the podcast kind of does. So, right, so I'm going to cover really how we first met, and we're going to bounce backwards and forwards. And as you said, we're going to talk about transitioning out of the military, because obviously you both served in the Navy. You joined a year ahead of me because I think I'd failed my A-levels and had to do an HND, which took me 4 years university. You were much cleverer, so you did 3 years. And then I followed you into the Navy. You stayed, and I left after about 5 years. So we first met on a flying scholarship at Kidlington when we had 30 hours, was it back then, flying Piper, Cherokee, Warrior 2 things?
Yeah, that's right. I think both you and I sort of met when we were around about 16 years old. We'd both, I think, followed a fairly similar path, actually, having been in the Air Cadets with an ambition to fly and all that sort of stuff. And we applied for flying scholarships with the RAF, which we were very lucky to receive. And we went for flying training at Kidlington in Oxfordshire. So when was that? That was 1991.
Yeah, I tried to work it out. Yeah,
quite some time ago. And that was great. Apart from a little bit of flying in the Air Cadets, that was my first proper experience of learning to fly and being introduced to the world of aviation, really.
Yeah, I kind of look back on that because I think if I hadn't done that flying scholarship, I probably wouldn't have actually joined the military in the end. I think I probably would have done, I'd probably joined the military in some capacity, because I think when you go through all those early cadets things that we all went through, probably would. I probably wouldn't have carried on trying to fly though. And I remember, I was never accepted into the Royal Air Force. So I think I had a flying scholarship and then I'd gone back again for a cadetship, which I was rejected for. Was that right? It could have been, actually. And I never applied to the Air Force again until, of course, the Air Force took me in after my flying training at Valley. But you carried on applying for the Air Force. And what interests me about this is that you eventually were told, if I remember correctly, not to apply again.
Yeah, I was really, as a kid...
You were Air Force through and through, weren't you?
Yeah, that had been my ambition right from a very, very early age. And I'd had a lot of support from my parents, and I'd been in the cadets, and I'd really sort of started out laying out a path from a really early age to trying to be a pilot in the Air Force, a fast jet pilot. That's what I wanted to do. And of course, I'd had the early encouragement with it being a flying scholarship, and then I also had a sixth form scholarship as well. So I thought,
hey,
this is going all right.
Yeah.
And then went to university, and I didn't actually. Let's step back a little bit. I didn't get into the Air Force off the back of my sixth form scholarship because options for change at the time, defence cuts, meant they reduced the number of people that they were entering into Cranwell, which meant, I think, literally a handful, 4 or 5 people that had been selected for sixth form scholarships out of the 80 that were selected. Only around about 4 or 5 actually entered into Cranwell when we completed A-levels. And of course, I was chopped from that group of people, went to university. I applied for RAF university cadetships and bursaries, which I didn't get. And I think I did that twice whilst I was at university. And then when I left university, I applied for the Air Force again and didn't get in. And I actually got a letter at that stage, stop applying.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen, Chris.
You're done.
So, pretty despondent by that stage. But, I think, that was where the Air Force path stopped. But I got quite a lot out of that, of pursuing that. I'd obviously had a flying scholarship, and also I'd been on a university air squadron as well. So I'd done a bit of flying for a couple of years with those guys, which of course was great fun and gave me quite a good experience of flying.
Yeah, I remember that actually, because so you're at university already, went to University of West of England. I arrived a year later, No, actually, didn't. I went at the same time. What are we talking about? We went at the same time, didn't we? Yeah,
Yeah,
both started at the same time.
yeah.
And you went and lived down in Bishopston. I lived up in Patchway. It's in Bristol. And then I think second year we moved in, didn't we? Some other people and stuff, and it was all good fun. But I remember you'd already gone to university. You joined the University Air Squadron because you were straight onto a degree. Now, I was on an HND in aerospace manufacturing engineering, I think it was, with on the French Air campus up to the north. So I wasn't eligible for an air squadron because they only took people on degrees. But the Officer Training Corps they would take anyone that was doing any kind of higher qualification. So I joined the Officer Training Corps and spent 4 years in that doing long-range patrolling competitions. And that's where I got very fond of army life, that kind of thing, and was looking to join the Royal Marines. And in the end, I ended up joining the Navy. It's a bit weird, isn't it? But yeah, it's strange how it all works out. But I do say to people, if they go to university, if they have an interest in the services, then that's like the best way you can ever sort of get an idea about what you're doing, isn't it? Is joining one of those high clubs,
Absolutely. I mean, I thought it was amazing, really. Yes, it did flying on the UAS, which was great, but actually you got access to, summer camps on RAF bases and, mixing and socialising with, regular serving people in the armed forces. So it wasn't just about being part of a club. It was actually about being a member of the reserve forces, really, and getting really good experience and exposure. So definitely, and whether it's Army, University Air Squadron, or the Navy with the URNU, University Royal Naval Unit. Tim, that was 20 odd years ago now. So I'm hoping that those organisations are still the same or have a similar ethos behind them. I'm sure they do. Whether the amount of flying is still available on the UAS or not, I don't know. I think it's reduced down, but who knows?
Well, we still go to the annual dinner. We're not going this year, but the OTC have an annual dinner, and of course they fleeced us of cash, basically. It's amazing. When I was in the OTC, we used to go. This is not even supposed to be on the topic, by the way. We need to change this. But we used to go on summer camps to Barry Budden, or used to go into Scotland and then down to Senny Bridge and down in Wales. And now they're going out to Cyprus and Canada. And I'm like, well, how do they afford that? And that's because they have these massive raffles that we pay loads of money into.
Yeah, mate, you're supporting that.
Yeah, I know. It's my money, isn't it? So they keep inviting us down there and stuff. I'm like, what? But it's good to go and see the guys. They always put a Cambrian patrol guy on the table as well. He's ripped up 18-year-old or something. You know what I mean? And I'm like, I did Cambrian and I was smaller than you and I did it back then, But right, anyway, what we're supposed to be talking about, really, apart from how great university was for us and all the kind of crazy things we did there in the flying, is really what you did then in the Navy. And that will roll us into probably transition, which is quite nice, into which I want to talk about the kind of life outside more than anything, because I think people that listen to the podcast, a lot of people are not in the military and they are outside working, and they're quite interested in how sort of military guys transition out.
Yeah,
so in the Navy. So you joined basically Dartmouth. I can't think of a date. I think I'm going to say 97.
January 98. So in 97, okay. I was then working in London. The whole Air Force career thing had obviously fallen flat.
Yeah.
And I went to London, lived with my girlfriend at the time. I had no idea what I was going to do. I walked into Brent Cross Shopping Centre one day, walked into John Lewis and said, can you put me onto a management training course, please? And they did pretty much there and then, which was great. But it was not what I wanted to do at all. And I can remember about 6 months into this job, I was pretty despondent. And I can remember thinking, I'm not going to stand around on a shop floor for the rest of my working career. And that afternoon when I finished, I think I'd done an early shift. I finished by about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I went to the careers office for the Royal Navy and went in and basically applied for the Fleet Air Arm. And that was really very rapid. Within, I think, about 3 months, I'd then left John Lewis and I was literally starting, at Dartmouth. The whole application process seemed to be, I must have just hit the timing well because, as I say, I went through the selection procedure pretty quickly. So Dartmouth in January 98 for a year, and then flying training. I initially went down the fast jet route, did the core basic fast jet training on the Tucano for a year. Clearly there was too much Air Force influence because they chopped me, and then went down the rotary route and eventually had a very, very rewarding career flying Lynx, Mark 3, Mark 8. And I pretty much did everything that I wanted to do in terms of rotary flying. I did a flight pilot's job on the front line. I instructed, did display flying. I really sort of took the Lynx as far as I could, really. So 16 years after joining, that's when I then left.
So what's the plural of Lynx?
Yeah, good one. Don't start
I
that.
don't know. I don't know. I've just been writing a syllabus for one of the other companies I actually work for, and they were like, "Yeah, we need several syllabus." And I'm like, "Do you mean syllabi?
Syllabi.
Syllabuses?" So I don't know. I mean, you flew Lynx for a long time. You can't even tell what the plural Lynx is. It probably is Lynx, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
critical to the podcast that we find that out. Brilliant.
Mate, I know I'm brilliant, but I could only fly one at a time anyway. So
But you didn't, did you? Because in the Black Cats there was two, so you flew as a pair, didn't you? That's right.
yes, I did. Yeah. So
That's,
I did.
they still displaying, are they?
No, so the Black Cats were the sort of Royal Navy's kind of flying display team, and they evolved through several different sort of carnations, I suppose. But when the aircraft went out of service and was replaced by the Wildcat, the numbers of aircraft and the resources available to support two frontline aircraft displaying every weekend at air shows all around the country for a whole summer. It's a hard push to get those guys to go and do it. They're not the guys that fly in the team. As I did, we were not regular full-time sort of display pilots. It was very much something we were doing at weekends, and then during the week having to do normal instructing role and everything else. And it's just, I don't think the resources are there to support it anymore.
Yeah, no, I think you're probably right, which is fair enough, isn't it? I read something in the Sunday Times. Was it Telegraph? It was about naval resources. And when Zambellis was offered the carriers, he was offered a choice, wasn't he? He was offered the carriers or the personnel. And I think he said, well, I'll take the carriers. And of course, now you've got a problem actually manning the carriers themselves. But it's across all services, isn't it? And a lot of it, I think, is a product. We can deep dive into this. Maybe is a product of say sort of aspiration of the young and what they want to do with their lives. There's a lot more things when you scroll through Instagram. There's a whole world of different jobs you can do. It's not just you look skywards and see an airplane. You've got, in fact, there's a guy I was going to talk about later. Might as well cover it now. A guy on LinkedIn who people reach out to me all over the place. Of course, this guy was one of the 170 guys or 180 guys that were chopped back in. Can't do the maths on this at all, but it was a few years back now, 7-8 years going through flying training. Right. And they chopped them because it was to do with the fact that if they got rid of those guys now early on in training, then they might be able to keep the guys who are already further on. And I understand the reasoning behind it. It hasn't really panned out too well like that, but you can't always work out what the future is. But the Air Force had just offered him. He went away. He's obviously a fighter, and he went and became a flight instructor down the south coast on light pistons. And he's just been offered by the Air Force to come back in, go straight to an A400M OCU. But also, TUI have offered him a first officer drive. So on, I don't know, some 7 series, whatever it is, Boeing. And he was putting a post out on LinkedIn saying, I don't know what to do. And I just said, look, you kind of got bitten once, Don't get bitten again by it. You know what I mean? Yeah. I would go and do the airline thing personally because you never know what's going to happen if you go back into the military. But that's the attitude now of the guys, and they're much more open to different experiences. And I think me and you weren't at the time. I think we were very focused down the, Air Training Corps into some university military club. I mean, I even since like Cubs when I was a kid, when I left the military, this year, since the age of about 5, I've always had some kind of weird disciplined service.
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, I've not been out of a uniform since the age of 13, actually. Cadets and UAS, and then joining the Navy, and then even now, having left the Navy, I'm still a reservist in the Royal Navy Reserve Air Branch.
I was going to ask that actually. Yeah. So I'm just going to get a picture up on my phone because I want to talk about what that means to be ex-military and what it does to your personality. And whilst I do that, so you're still a reservist now, but you're not flying anymore. Are you still working in the sim? Is that right?
That's right. So when I left the Navy, I started the business, Proudhouse Property Management. So I started a service or business providing property management and lettings for people in the armed forces.
Yep.
And but I was very lucky. The Navy have got, or the Fleet Air Arm, I suppose, have got the Royal Navy Reserve Air Branch, which is a reserve service that you can join. You can only join it if you've actually got military or Navy aviation experience and background. And the idea is that the Navy can retain aviation experience that would be otherwise expensive to gain or expensive to lose, depending on how you want to view it. And those reservists can still contribute to squadrons. So, and the thing about being in the R&R Air Branch is it's not a band of people together. The members are dispersed among the squadrons and the units and so on to support and augment and assist the regular guys. So the great thing about that, and I think we're going to talk about transition at some point during this conversation, but the great thing about that is actually the transition process becomes a lot easier because you've still got those links, you've still got the support, you've still got the friendships and the socializing and everything else, which is great. And also, you get quite a sense of worth from doing it because you're back in a unit, contributing, your experience and knowledge and everything else. So the reservist is a great, for me, it works really, really well. There's another aspect to it as well. So much of my business in my civvy work relies on military personnel. So by going back into my unit and going back to Yeovilton, where I'm based, I'm still networking with potential clients. So, there's a bit of a win-win situation there. So it works really well.
Do you miss the flying?
No,
I don't miss it either. I don't miss it. But then again, you've been out longer than me. You went gliding, didn't you? You thought, I know what I'll do.
Oh, do you know what? Yes, I
love this. Yeah, this makes me laugh.
I thought I was going to need some sort of, replacement aviation kind of fix, and I thought, do you know what? I don't really want to lose my flying skills. And it's worth pointing out as well, my role in the reservist, in the air branch, is as a simulator instructor. So I've converted onto the Wildcat as a sort of ground school only, so to speak. And I now work, teaching and instructing in the Wildcat simulator. So yes, it's an aviation job, but I'm not flying, and I don't maintain any kind of military flying currency. And about 4 years ago, I thought, I know what, I'll go and do some gliding with the Yeovilton Gliding Club. And I did it for a couple of afternoons, and it was very pleasant. But I realised that actually, there was, I wasn't really getting a huge amount out of it. I mean, it's not. And I wasn't enjoying it, but it was, I've got other things to do. I've kind of made that realization, I suppose, that, there are now other things in my life to focus on that are just as rewarding. And, I'd like to return to aviation and, flying specifically at some point in my life, but I think perhaps I'll become one of those old gits that, flies on a flying club when he's retired and doddery and mad, doesn't really know what he's doing. He's probably dangerous to everyone, and is blissfully unaware. And that will suit me perfectly, I think. But for the time being, no, I don't need the flying. Do I miss it? No. I think what a lot of people don't necessarily understand about the military aviation environment is the amount of time, effort, energy, stress, resources, sacrifice you have to make to just get airborne, let alone go and deploy and do a high-paced, dangerous job anywhere in the world. So no, I don't miss that. I've done it, but don't need to go back.
No, I agree. On my last trip, I went through Shobden, which is a little airfield quite close to me, actually. I live near Cheltenham. And obviously there's guys lined up to get airborne, and we kept on the ground, went through that 420 knots at about 250 feet, and just called up Shobden. They were flying, come through, and I went and gave them a talk, and it's a light piston club up there. They're lovely guys. I just don't particularly feel the need to go and be part of that. And I think there are aspects of it that, we know. I was a bomber pilot, right? So I used to plan targets and hit targets to the second. If you can do that, as you know, there's a real sense of achievement with it. And I like that. But one thing I realise now, and this is what I write about and other stuff that I'm doing, is being outside, even though I could lose my job tomorrow, I do a lot of contract work and stuff, it doesn't really bother me because there's opportunity out there. And that opportunity comes from the weirdest of places. Whether it's a speaking gig or whether it's going in and just sitting in a company and advising or doing the things I'm doing now. I mean, we'll talk about this weird dream I had in a second because that's quite interesting. I'm interested in your take on that. But I think I'm glad that I did the time I did, and I don't look back and wish I'd done more. In fact, I think I overstayed of anything by about 4 years, and we spoke about that because I did 20 years in the end. And I would probably, if the sim was closer, if I was nearer the valley, I'd probably be in the sim a couple of days a week. I'm sure I could do that. I do enjoy helping people out, but I'm not going to go back and live on the island again. I'm not going to live on Anglesey. I need to transition out and stuff. And there's just, I'll tell you the other thing I noticed as well, leaving the military. And where you were based down in Yeovil, you probably haven't realised this, but I lived in Lossy. I lived on Anglesey, and that was pretty much my whole 20 years, apart from flying training. And when I moved down south, everything is like within 30 minutes drive. It's really weird. I met Buffy's parents, my wife's parents. I met them in the pub. We both went down there yesterday. It was down in the Cotswolds, and it took us like 40 minutes to get there. They'd come up from like Oxford, and it was. I'm like, we could never have done that before. No. We could never have. It would have taken us 4 hours or something. So I like the fact that I can go. Just go to Cheltenham and have a cup of tea. That never happened in my 20 years. So there's this interesting, and this is something I want to talk to you about as well, was that repression. It's not repression, that's the wrong word. What does the service do to people in the service? What happens to them? And okay, conformity. Conformity is one of those things. I'm going to show you a quick picture of, I did this test that I think Jordan Peterson recommended to find out on your personality traits. It was like extroversion, openness, conscientiousness, agreeableness, emotional range. And I had 0 in openness, right? And that's quite a bad thing.
Okay.
What it means is, and he talks about this, and he says it means you're not open to new experiences. You're very conservative, very conformist. The questions that were on his test, whatever it was called, and I'll try and put the link in the podcast here, were things like, do you like poetry and seek out opera and all this kind of stuff? And I was like, no, I don't. I just don't do it. I haven't got any time for that, really, which is awful. But then I do enjoy certain things. Like I've got given some bonsai trees for Christmas. And I've got to plant them and do all that stuff. I'm interested in that. So there's different aspects, and I don't think it was like a 0 really, probably like a 20% for openness. But either way, my openness was very low. Then I found something in the paper about the English rugby team, and I'm just going to put this here. You might be able to see that. You might not be able to. I don't know, you set.
Yeah, I can see that. A very, very lopsided pentagon.
Yeah, so that bit that's collapsed on the side there for the team, the English rugby team, is openness. They score very low in openness. And they score average in the rest of them, which was extroversion, which I think Peterson says is something like neuroticism, sorry, and then which is very high in women apparently. And there's agreeableness, which interestingly my wife is not. My wife is very high in agreeableness, and I'm very low in agreeableness. And that's interesting, really, because when it comes to neuroticism, you want to have someone who's high to be balanced by someone who's low, and I get that. Yeah. Sometimes with things like agreeableness, you both want to kind of be roughly the same, apparently. In openness, if you're living with someone who's very open and you're not very open, that causes problems. So now she did the test as well. We put them both together, and we're like, I kind of understand why sometimes, it'd be better to live apart or something, where sometimes we don't always agree. And that's fine. I get that. But that was really interesting. So what is it with the service that it does to us? I know there's an aspect of conformity. We go in, we conform. We like conforming. We've been Cubs, we've been Scouts, we've been in Air Training Corps, we've been in the University Air Squadrons or whatever it is. We go into the military. We are conformists. Traditionally, maybe right of centre, maybe conservative. I think that's pretty much approved and well written about in the services. But is it us? What I'm saying is here, is the service repressing us in any way, or are we repressing ourselves about our lack of going out and having experiences and everything else? What is that?
Well, I think it's a really interesting question. I think a lot of it comes down from the very strong sense of a teamwork and esprit de corps, which is engendered and fostered in the armed forces. Most people want to feel like they're conforming and belonging to a team. So you're perhaps likely to alter even temporarily, and temporarily might be for the whole duration of your career in the armed forces, I suppose, but you're likely to alter perhaps let's take openness as an example. Perhaps you're likely to alter that to conform with the other people in the team. But I think the other thing that's really, really important to consider is with the armed forces, you have to win. You have to have the winning mentality, because when it comes to armed conflict, you can't have people that are not thinking that they're going to win or succeed. So we're constantly being told on our military units that we're the best unit, or we're the best squadron, or you're the best pilot. You're always kind of in some sort of competition, friendly competition, really, with your peers and other people on the unit. And I think that whole process has a very long-term, I can't think of the word, effect, where after the cumulative effect of being told you're great, or you're good, or you need to win, or you need to succeed, means that probably by the time you finish your careers, you're not necessarily going to be open to something that conflicts with that mindset that you've been in. And I think there are some military units, I'm not going to start naming them, but where that sense of what's the word?
Self-belief? Is it self-belief?
Yeah, that's exactly that. That sense of self-belief is so strong that actually you end up with people who lead the armed forces almost a little bit arrogant and institutionalized. And that's the completely out of balance, hard over effect of that process, I think.
So I had John Dunn on the podcast recently, an F3 pilot. I know you know John. I think from Linton. He was a Linton instructor. I know he's there your time. He went through on similar time to us. And I said that I felt there were people that I stayed in contact with who'd left the military who were quite humble. So they had a high aspect of humility and they weren't arrogant. And he said, I said, so they didn't have any ego. And he corrected me. He said, well, we've all got ego. We have to have ego in order to do the job. And he's right, of course. There's a level, isn't there, which you get challenged to. And you're like, dude, you have no idea what you're talking about. I fly jets for a living, whatever, go away. So we do have that level. But I think that introspection is something that the people I stay in contact with out of the military, and there's not that many of people that I've flown with for a long period of time, a lot of them in the desert out in Saudi, a lot of them like yourself, whatever I've got a history with. I'm quite surprised at the lack of people, but our lifestyles are transient, of course, weren't they? So you might know a guy and his wife for 2 years and then they're gone, but you always pick up the lost pieces. I think the guys I keep in contact with are introspective. They look back and they debrief themselves constantly, which is not necessarily a healthy thing. I'm not saying it is, but they're always thinking, how could I have done that better? What did I do the other day? And I thought, I've actually made a mistake there. And I had to. I'm with Buffy, and she's like, "Oh, you're gonna do this again?" And I'm like, I'm interested how that's happened. And I had to kind of then deep dive into that to go, well, why didn't I forecast that happening? It's not often these things happen. And normally we plan ahead, don't we, in everything we do, which is a big problem for us because it means that we can't necessarily live in the moment. Which I know you're doing better at than I am, by the way.
Right.
You're doing much better at this than I am because I'm still. Well, you know what I'm talking about when this happens. So I still think. What am I going to do next year, the year after? I plan these things to the nth degree. And I remember you once telling me about holidays someone in your life was planning, and immediately you thought about the whole thing about, well, if we go to this country and we do this, and this is happening in the hills, and I was like, yeah, you do what I do. You think about the nth degree, and you do it so quickly. And I wrote an essay about that. I can't remember what it was called now. I have to Google my stuff now because I've written so much. But it was about a pilot literally saying, look, you don't understand. I've thought about this to the sixth degree, and I've done it in half a second, and you can never even understand where I am. So I'm trying to appreciate the now. That's what I'm getting at. But you are a lot better at this, and that's probably because you've been out a few more years, I guess, is it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably true. Being surrounded by people, I mean, I now run my business, and the people that I employ, and a lot of my clients are military, but I don't have day-to-day contact with them. I have more contact now with my local tradesmen who are doing maintenance on the properties that I manage. I've got my staff and my employees. I've got local businesses that I deal with. So I'm, completely dealing with, civilian people. And you can't control those people. It's not like being in the military anymore, where you've all got the same mindset and you've all got pretty much the same aim and ambition and objective and everything else. You're dealing with a complete, mix and myriad of people who have all got their own motives and objectives in life. And you really have to kind of go with the flow. And it's interesting what you were talking about earlier about, making a mistake. That for me is probably one of the biggest obstacles that I've come across. When I make a mistake, or when my staff make mistakes, I often want to evaluate them, and I want to work out why something has happened, what the cause and effect was, and then put in place, some measures or procedures to prevent it happening again. And that's all very well and good, but there also gets to a point where you just have to say, sod it. It doesn't matter. Move on, because actually the time spent trying to gold plate everything and make it perfect is not worth the outcome, because people will always make mistakes, and you're never going to change someone's, if you've got a member of staff and their objective is just to work and turn up and get paid and go home again, you're never going to make that person a highly ambitious, career orientated achiever. If that's not what they want to be, that they're not going to be that. And you have to have that sort of mentality more, I think, to succeed in Civvy Street, because in the armed forces you don't have that. You've got very, very similar personality types, or if it's not similar personality types, you've got people with very similar mindsets.
Yeah, that's really valid, and so I think you're absolutely right. What I forget now, I'm in Civvy Street, is that we went through a lot of training. Just in initial officer training, or with the Air Force or in Britannia Royal Naval College, we went through about a year of that. Yeah. And that's all preparing you for what you're going to do. And then obviously professional training, it took like how long for a flying training? Like 3 years, like more than that, probably 4 years. And then I come back out to Civvy Street and I expect people to do the things I'm doing and turn up to meeting on time. And if I've asked them to do something, they get it done. If they can't do it, then they should tell me that they haven't done it. because I'm kind of split now. This is where I'll tell you about this dream. This segues quite nicely into this weird dream I had last night. I don't really dream too much. So this dream is like, and this is where you can do your Dr. Chris bit and you can analyze me or whatever, and you go. So I'm in this dream, right? And I woke up and thought I'm going to Google this and work out what this meant, because I don't really dream. And it's all about, like, I lost my phone, so I was going back to like a halls or like a mess room or something, you know, whatever it would be. They're all quite similar. I end up in the middle of this one. I'm checking my phone. I'm standing in the middle of my room, whatever. And I soon realize it's not my room. It's someone else's room. So I look around. It's not my stuff. I'm like, I'm in someone else's room. So I'm like, oh, this is kind of weird. So I kind of, okay, I better go back to my own room. And I go back to my own room. But then when I get to my own room, eventually find it, I'm like, oh, I haven't got my phone with me. I better go back and get my phone. I must have left it in that room or somewhere on the way. So I go back and I try and find my phone. On the way back, this is my dream, by the way, I find other phones. I look at them and I'm like, these are similar phones, but they're not my phone. And I go back in and I can't find this other room again. I can't find my phone. So it's all about losing a phone. I'm like, that's really weird. And I kind of wake up. I'm like, I don't really dream anyway. I don't dream about losing my phone. What's going on? So I had to go and Google that. And if the loss of the phone thing is about, I've got it written down here on my screen. It's about, there's like a loss of status, or it can be about separation, i.e. there's someone that you're not able to connect with anymore, you know what I mean? Or something. It's about being emotionally stranded somewhere. It's kind of weird. And that's what the internet is telling me. So I went and did the deep dive analysis on this, which of course you'd expect anyone in our position to do. Like, so what does that mean for me? And it could be something to do with when they leave the military. I left the military 1st of June. We have some gardening leave before that, which takes about 3 months, where you do some courses, which hopefully we'll chat about in a minute. So maybe I don't really have a status at the moment. I'm not identified as Tim. You know, when I was flying jets, everyone knew Tim Davies, you fly jets, that's fine, you're an instructor, that's what you do. And now I'm a chairman of a rowing club. I've been rowing for like a year and a half. They just made me the chairman, so I've got to host a meeting tonight. So I'm a chairman of a rowing club. I am a consultant working down for a big UK prime who's bidding into ASDOT, which is the Air Support Defence Operational Training. It's the Red Air, what 736 Naval Air Squadron and 100 Squadron do for typhoons and tornadoes. So I do consultant work on that, bringing a jet platform in. I'm the strategy director for a company called Aerolist. I spoke about that on my last podcast, where we're trying to design 3 aircraft with a common core fuselage, and that's very interesting. But there's all these different things. I'm running a podcast. I do the website. I do a lot of speaking. I'm doing these things, and yet, you know, what am I actually? You know, and do I need to be defined as something? Because I thought when I left the service I would be, and a lot of people leave and they go and join, I don't know, BA Systems, don't they? And they're a business development guy in BA Systems. And I guess you left. I can't remember what your transition was like, and that's maybe a good thing to talk about. But that's what I'm thinking about now is, do I need a status? A, is that important to me as a person? Is it really important that I have a status and I'm known as something? Do I need to create an empire and be exceptionally wealthy? I don't think I do. I think we transition. As we hit 40, I think priorities become quite different, don't they? You know, we talked about that before. We're trying to work out what contentment and happiness is and purpose, maybe. And the way I'm looking at this now, all these things, I'm looking at it from a sense of responsibility, because I think responsibility, if you have responsibility in your life, then you have some aspect of direction. So the transition for me is still ongoing, is what I'm saying. I haven't really worked out what I want to do. I mean, I know you're in a defined role because you have a business and you employ people, and the difficulties that happen with that. And that's what we enjoy talking to you about, and how those things kind of work. But coming out of the service and being entrepreneurial those two words don't necessarily lend themselves to each other quite well. What did you do in transition then that led you into what you're doing now? Because when you came out, I think you did what was the course you did? Electrician's course, something, wasn't it?
Yeah, I did that, which, I mean, I'll talk about that in a minute, but just sort of go back to, I suppose, the start of my transition. I knew that I didn't want to be the sort of person at the age of 50, 55, or possibly even older, still in the armed forces, having only ever done one thing in my whole life. Yeah. And I also knew that I wanted to leave the armed forces or leave the Navy whilst still feeling good about what I was doing and about the people and the role and so on. Because you always see that old guy in the bar, in the mess, in the wardroom, whatever. He's been in the Navy for years, and he's always the bloke having a drink and saying, oh, it's not like it used to be, you know, and so on. I didn't want to be that person, you know, and so I knew that 16 years was my natural career break, and for about 7 or 8 years before that point, you know, so only halfway through my career, I was getting my annual, you know, appraisals, and you have to tick a box as to whether you're a volunteer for further service. And most people tick that box. You know, why not? It's not compulsory to stay on. But if you tick the box to say you're a volunteer for further service, then you're more likely to be considered for promotion and be able to stay for longer than 16 years and so on. And I deliberately resisted ticking that box because I wanted to make sure that the 16-year point, I didn't have an option to stay.
Yeah, brilliant.
I wanted to almost force myself to go, so that I was actually in a position where I had to make that decision. Okay, what am I going to do now? So I made that decision really, really early on. And then also, I knew that I wanted to run a business. I come from a family of business owners, I suppose. Certainly on my dad's side, the family, I've grown up in a home life where my parents were not employees; they were small business owners. So for me, I suppose it felt quite natural to want to run my own business. But the question really was, well, what? And without going into too long a story, I had a conversation with my ex-wife's ex-father-in-law, and he ran a property management and lettings business in Oxford. And we had a conversation over at one lunchtime, and he basically said, well, you probably could run a business doing, management and lettings for people in the armed forces. So I thought, okay, I'll give that a go. And that was the plan. And I incorporated the company in 2010. So that was 4 years before I actually left the Navy. And I just kept ticking over in my mind what the kind of outline business plan was, what the model was, and what I was going to try and achieve. And I just kept working on that bit by bit. I got things like the website ready. I did some graphic design and logo work and so on. I did all the basics so that by the time 2014 came along, which is when I was due to leave the Navy, I was at the stage where I really wanted to kind of, crack on. I was finding that staying in the Navy was hindering me, and I was really, really keen just to get outside and get on with the business. So in terms of the transition process, the armed forces, I think, are very good in terms of their resettlement programs. There's a lot of courses available down in Aldershot, and also grants and all sorts of bits and pieces available. But I'd set up this business of lettings and property management. And you talk about status. I mean, leaving the Royal Navy as a Fleet Air Arm helicopter pilot and becoming a letting agent, I mean, that is a little bit of a letdown when it comes to status. The lettings industry has got a very bad reputation, or certainly some parts of the country it has. So, there was quite a few sort of questions for me to, resolve in my own mind about that sort of change of status. But the running the business thing was it felt really natural for me. And the courses available for career transition, there was a business owners course, and there was a course on, doing self-assessment tax and bits and pieces like that. But none of those courses would have created a plan for me. They would have supplemented, or they did supplement the plan that I already had, but they wouldn't have actually helped me create a business. And I think for my lesson to anyone leaving the military and starting a business themselves is get your plan prepared nice and early. Work out what it is that you want to do, and then cherry pick the stuff that's available to help you and assist you. But don't expect someone to just come and lay it all down for you and create a business. It's not going to happen. You have to do it, and you have to do it nice and early.
No, I think it's valid. I mean, it's so true, isn't it? I used a lot of that 3 months in transition. I think I did a course in crew resource management trainer, so I'm a CRMT instructor. That was for a week, and that really just repeated the stuff that I was writing about already for the last few years, which is great. Kind of formalised it. I go and speak to some companies about that. I've spoken to NHS and some big businesses. I'm not overly sure that's particularly what my future is, of standing there and saying, let's talk about, I don't want to do the keynote talks for people that last an hour and a half. But I'm still trying to work out what those things are. I quite like the variety. But why didn't you go and work for like some big defence prime or something? I don't understand. Well, you had like Westlands down there and stuff. You could have done something like that and BD and stuff, couldn't you?
Yeah, I could. And, perhaps that might have been something... Tim, I'll be really honest with you. I loved flying. I loved military life, and I really enjoyed being on the Squadron and so on. But I'm not the sort of person that's into... analysing defence and hardware and politics and everything else on that side of things. That just wasn't really me. Perhaps developing or consulting or advising on some kind of military project for a defence company might be great. But I also think, well, if I've got that energy and analysis and mind power to do that for someone else, then why not do it for myself?
Yeah.
But also going back to what you were saying about the different things that you sort of did do or have been involved with, I mean, you've done a very similar thing to what I did. You set up, various options and paths that you could take, and you see which one grows, you see which one develops. I mean, you mentioned I did some electricians courses because they were available, very, very cheap, really, great quality training to go out and become an electrician, and I did all that, but I only kind of really did it as a bit of a backup in case the whole business plan fell apart. And if I really needed to just go and put an advert in the local paper and go and do some electrical work on people's houses, because I've got tools and I quite like, doing hands-on stuff, it was an option there. Funnily enough, I started doing quite a bit, and I started getting a reputation amongst, my military mates as an electrician and not as a business owner. And it was almost going, slightly, I was gaining a reputation that I didn't want. I wanted people to know me for the business that I had actually started, which was my main effort. So I suppose be careful as well in what you do end up doing. You might become known for something that's not really what your main aim is. But that's all sort of distilled out now. Obviously, I'm on quite a good path with my business, and I can now afford to just start dropping some of those bits and pieces. So I've done, hardly any electrical work. I mean, that was, as I say, as a backup really, and that's now fallen by the wayside. The R&R as a reservist is still important to me, but who knows? It might be that in the next few years I don't quite need that so much. Who knows? All depends on how life works out, really.
No, I'm quite interested in that. I'm interested because I remember you saying something about the electrician work that you were doing, and there was always there was going to be a default that you couldn't get above. In effect, you were going to be in, if you carried on doing that, you're going to be an electrician. You're going to face the same problem other electricians faced. You'll probably end up wiring up Bovis or Wimpy houses. It was going to be, that's what your job would be every day. You go and do that, and then you do that forever, and then other people come in the trade, and you see what I mean. It was like there was no scalable kind of potential of that. I'm quite interested in, and the problem I've got right here as a one-man guy who goes out and does stuff and works with different businesses. I don't mind the politics. You understand that. In defence world, there is a lot of politics, especially with Aerialist at the moment, because we're hanging on with some real senior defence primes who we're a small startup, but they're quite big. I would like them to help us with the PR and stuff, and of course they won't because we're not always on contract. But there's a lot of politics with that. As a one person, me, that's not really scalable. You see what I mean? It's like, how do I, with your company, you're a letting agency, so all around the south, of course, eventually, I know you've spoken about this before, you go, there's going to be another Proudhouse. There'll be another Proud, and you could do that, but with that, of course, comes the employment of people. People are a bit of a nightmare sometimes. How dare they think for themselves? And you've got to manage that, and now you start becoming a manager. Your time is now taken up with sitting in the office, which we know is a very toxic environment to be in. That's what I'm in at the moment, typing away. You're not out engaging with people, and that's what we want to do. So you get to the point where no matter what career you take when you leave the military, you've really got to look at a long term and think about what you want, haven't you? Because if you are going to pick a skill, like I want to be a bricklayer or something, or whatever it might be, even an architect, you're still that one person. Yeah. And you might be picking something that has no scalable potential. Yeah. And more to the point, you can never take a back step out of it. Because it relies on you being there. And if I was out there talking to companies the whole time, I'm trying to drop the coaching a little bit now as well because it gives me more free time. But if I'm out there the whole time standing in front of companies because it's me, then that I've got to be there physically. Yeah. And when I retire, that stops. And and that's a real big issue for me. So I'm trying to work out how to influence something where I can literally take a back steps to keep it going and trying to work out what that project is. I mean, you have that vehicle at the moment, but it's one of those things I see. You know what I did when I left it? I'll just tell you right now real quick. The first job I applied for was, I know my wife said this to you already, isn't she? Because she does this. I applied to be, there was an advert for a giraffe keeper at a zoo. I thought I could do that. I didn't realise you had to have a degree in zoology to look after giraffes. I was like, I own giraffes. I've seen giraffes on TV. I could do that.
It's so necky of you.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, who are giraffes anyway? I know everything about giraffes. I even read up on Wikipedia about giraffes and all that. They've got non-return valves in the neck and stuff to stop them, blood pressure and all stuff. But it came with another side as well. You're a giraffe trainer, but you had to kind of look after the rhinos as well. And I got told, that you're not allowed to do that. You don't even come and apply. I was put off by that. But so that was my first failure when I left the military. I'm not allowed to be a giraffe keeper. I mean, how hard is it being a giraffe keeper? So, what would you get? What's the advice then you give the people when they left the military? Because I've been thinking about this. What would I tell someone leaving the military and they were unsure of what work they wanted to do? Because when we come out, by the way, we have very little idea, and we really do very little idea. We're very closeted, I guess, but by definition, as you said, of being in the military.
I think my biggest piece of advice would be, believe in yourself and look at the skills that you've got. You've got more than you think you have. In the armed forces, especially coming from an aviation environment, it's very prescribed what you can and can't do. You've got a certain amount of experience. You've got a certain number of flying hours. You've got to achieve a certain number of hours a month to be able to maintain sort of currency or whatever it might be. And you've got all this sort of tick box sort of mentality that kind of dictates what you can and can't do. When you go into Civvy Street, I don't want to say the world is your oyster. That's a really sort of cheesy expression, but you do have it's all there ready for you to just dive in and get stuck in. You need resources and you need a plan, but there's not going to be anybody saying you can't do that. There will be people that will say that, but they're not going to be the people that are actually going to put up a barrier. If you want to, and I'm talking about from running a business point of view here. If you want to run a business, whatever it might be. Obviously, you've got to have a good business plan. Your idea has got to be viable. It's got to be a service or an item that people want. But I think the people that come from the armed forces, you've got so much experience in terms of planning, organisation, evaluation, being self-critical, being able to take criticism. All those things are really, really necessary because, as you've mentioned in your blog articles in the past, failure. It's about failing and then learning from the mistakes, picking yourself up, and then moving forward. And I think people in the armed forces are actually very, very good at doing that. It's almost been, they've made a career of doing that sort of stuff, really. So I think that would be my main advice to people leaving the military. Would be, believe in yourself and look at what it is that you've got in terms of your personal attributes. You'll be a lot stronger and a lot more resilient than the equivalent civilian person at your age or stage in life. Definitely.
I had to look up recently, and there's someone in the office, and I had to ask her about it because she was a civilian, and I said I don't understand what's happening with this thing, and it was about what do they call it when someone is I can't remember the term now. When someone is like they're sort of saying that you're not doing something, but they're saying it in a tone. You know what I mean? It's I can't remember what the actual phrase is now. I've just escaped me. But I was like, the office politics, we don't really understand. We never really kind of have it. We never see these things. We're quite open and honest with each other. And we're quite direct. We're really direct,
yes.
Aren't we?
Yeah.
It doesn't really happen outside. It's almost like kind of spoken around in some environments. I work heavily military, so that's pretty good. I would say half the office is military, but half the office isn't. And very often, sometimes something's said that I don't understand. And I'm like, okay, I don't know what that means. I've got to go and ask someone, what exactly is he or she saying to me? It's almost sort of putting something down you've done, but in a kind of way that's not hostile, but it kind of is. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I've got a little sort of story about that. So with the business that I run, we've got so many sort of clients and properties and landlords and tenants and maintenance issues. It's really important that we log everything we do. So I've designed and created and maintain a fairly complex database of stuff, which does all sorts of things for us. But one of the important things is we log our activity. Yeah. And the important thing about those log records is you should be able to read back through them and understand what they mean clearly. So one of the things I've had to say to my staff is don't just use them as a sort of a notes to self system. As the member of staff might be able to read back through them and understand what those log messages mean, but if they don't mean anything to anyone else, then they're kind of pointless, really. And this was a real challenge for a good year or so, trying to go back through the log records and fathom out what some members of staff were writing and what they meant was really quite difficult. So I started a process whereby I could give a green tick or a red cross next to a log record. It was like my way of marking the log records to say whether I could understand them or not. Anyway, I started this process and the staff did not like it at all. If they got a red cross, they were really quite upset, thinking that I was angry with them. I was upset with them. They were going to lose their job. And I was trying to say, no, this is all about just trying to indicate to you that I can or cannot understand this message. So I then changed it. I got rid of the red cross and I turned it into like an emoji, thinking face emoji. but even then, people didn't like getting the thinking face emoji. You know, green ticks they liked, thinking face emoji, no, they didn't.
It's incredible.
And I thought, how do I have some sort of a basic evaluation system here, so that I can give feedback to my staff, so that they know whether what they're writing actually makes any sense or not. And I eventually I basically had to abandon it. I mean, I really, it was, I just approached it from a different point of view in the end, in that I would just be very repetitive, very nice, and just say, every time there was something that I couldn't understand, I would go to the relevant member of staff and say, I'm sorry, I don't understand this. Can you rewrite it, please? And it's just that repetitive process,
right,
whereby, you just have to keep, in a very nice, polite way, say, I don't understand this. Can you rewrite it? And that's worked.
Okay.
But the direct negative approach of, I do not understand what you're writing, so I'm putting a big red cross next to it, it doesn't work. Whereas you and me would take that in a very literal sense, be like, okay, I must do better, so I will. Yeah, different mentality, definitely.
Well, it's the military mentality, isn't it? I suppose what we do in the military, we cut out all the chaff on the outside.
Yeah. I don't want to write a big long passage of feedback to someone. I just want to give them a red cross if they don't understand.
It's not even personal, is it, really? It's not even personal. If anything, you're saying, look, this could be a problem with me that I don't understand it. You know what I mean? But I just need you to be a bit more direct. The term was passive-aggressive. That was a thing.
Yes.
I had to ask this lady, and she wasn't doing it to me, don't get me wrong, but I had to say, look, you've been a civilian for 20 years. I've been in the military. And she said, oh, yeah, that's what you're witnessing there is passive-aggressive behavior. And I was like, I don't know what that means. I've kind of heard it on like TV programs. Yeah. And I don't think I'd ever experienced it in the military, where someone is literally, I think, being condescending to you. There's examples you can look up on the internet. I had to literally Google what does passive aggressive terms mean. Yeah. And someone's literally putting you down, but they're saying, oh, an example would be, you've done really well to get this job considering your background.
Yeah.
And that apparently that's a passive aggressive term. And so of course I was going, oh, thank you. Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. I get, and I'm like, you feel a bit hurt by it, but you don't know why. And so I get a lot of that sometimes outside the military. I never had before. Not necessarily to me. I see it to other people. Another thing I did when I left as well was I tried to keep meetings on time, with a schedule, with an agenda, with a debrief, with that kind of stuff, with minutes that had to be actioned. Yeah. That's never worked. I'm running this chair of this rowing club, and again, it's like herding cats. There's good people, bad people. I get how it is. I just realised that I can't imprint the last 20 years in the military onto. No. And I shouldn't try, as you're saying. You shouldn't try. You should just bring the best examples you can with you. Don't take it personally. Try and input in a real positive way to whatever environment you're in. Understand that people have frailties like we do as well, and kind of sort of run with that. Really, it's interesting, especially with that openness thing I was talking about earlier. I realised there's gaps in my education for the last 20 years when it comes down to now being a civilian. So I'm looking at what I need to do now to, as I said, with openness, I obviously lack in that trait. So I've gone and done things like I've said to my wife, okay, let's go to a ballet. Let's read some books I wouldn't read. I don't watch much TV. So now I sit down on a Sunday and she makes me watch an episode of whatever TV. So I'm trying to broaden my horizons in that. When you left them, was there anything apart from, obviously you've clarified some things. What did you think, I'm really lacking in this particular thing? Maybe could you have seen that you were lacking in anything before you left the military? I say lacking. You know what I mean when I say lacking? I'm not saying it was a fault of yours or anything. I'm just saying that.
I definitely felt daunted. I mean, you talked about imposter syndrome in the past. Yeah. I definitely felt that. I mean, one thing I didn't explain, the other thing, I suppose, a lot of my sort of colleagues in the Navy knew me as someone that knew about property, because I'd refurbished my own houses that I'd lived in. So occasionally people would come to me to ask about DIY problems, how do I've got this broken bit of skirting board or whatever it might be, and I'd give them little tips and hints on doing stuff. So I became this sort of person around the squadron that people kind of knew as someone that knew about kind of property. And I did kind of capitalize on that a little bit when I left and sort of big myself up. But really, deep down, there was me, leaving the Navy, setting up a business as a property manager, kind of someone that knew about property investment and all that sort of stuff. And in fairness, I was a landlord, and I'll talk about my property portfolio another time perhaps. But I definitely felt like an imposter because I was blagging it. I really was. People were asking me questions about property, about investment, about rentals, and so on. And I would always say, yeah, no worries, I can find out an answer for that. I'll just give me a few minutes and I'll get back to you. And then I was like, of course, running around with my hair on fire, looking up references and documents and books to find out the relevant piece of information that this client needed. So definitely lacking experience, but of course everyone starts from a position of no experience. You kind of have to, depending on what area that you're going to go into, really. So again, it's just about that resilience to approaching and recognizing your shortfalls or your areas that you don't have perhaps the knowledge or the experience that you need, but it's about having that resilience to make sure you can still perform and give the service that people want.
I also think it's the ability to understand, as we have, that you may well fail at your first job, right? Maybe even your second or your third one. I mean, you might be asked to move on or whatever, and it's not necessarily a reflection on you. It's a reflection on just the environment you've gone into, and you just don't understand it because you haven't been in it before. That's what I'm finding. And one of my jobs, my contract's going to end pretty soon. And if it gets renewed, I'll probably carry on down there. I might not. I'll see. It's one of those things. I might move on somewhere else. I'm really not concerned. What's interesting to me is hopefully, in a way, I'm saying hopefully it won't be renewed. I don't mean it in a negative sense, because I really enjoy working with the people I'm working with down there, and the problems are exceptionally complicated and the timeframes are very small. So, but what I mean is I'm doing that for now and have done for the last 4 or 5 months. It'll be nice to do something else to give me more life experience in something else. And then maybe I could do 2 or 3 major projects a year whilst I'm doing the things I want to do in the background. If I could still go out and help people to bring in some kind of quality and value into their business, whatever that might be, then I don't mind doing that. But I don't want to lose track of what I'm doing as well. Just trying to figure out what that actually is, of course. And I don't think there was time. I don't think there was time in the service, though, to really work it out.
No.
You see what I mean? We don't. When you're talking about like planning for detachment or whatever, it's all encompassing. And it's only now I've left I realize how like 24 hours a day that really was. It was just, and even in the evenings, you're still, you know what trips you're going to do the next day, you know what instruction you have to do, and you do the work for it, you get in, that trip changes, short notice, you've got to do that work again. And I look back on the squadrons I was on in the past, there was an underlying level of stress, I think, that is no longer in my life. It's a different kind of stress, but that stress isn't there anymore. So I find that quite interesting. And when you leave, I remember thinking not immediately, but after a month or so, there felt, although there was apprehension, there was also a certain amount of anxiety. There was also this lifting, this weight off my shoulders.
Definitely. I relate to that. Definitely. Sort of that, like I say, the underlying level of stress, which everyone is subject to, even second line role, you're like, so big. I'm sure it's the same for every military unit. You've got your immediate program, your flying program the next day or for the week coming. You've got your short cast, which is what the squadron or the unit is doing over the next 4 weeks or whatever it might be. Mid cast, long cast, everything's planned out for you. But by the same token, yes, it's all planned out, but you still got to make sure that you're ticking all those boxes, making sure that you're current and correct and in date for medicals, this, that, the other. And you've got that stress all the time of knowing that you've kind of got to perform, and that's just the basic kind of administrative level. You've also got the stress of knowing that you're in the armed forces and you could be called upon at any time to go and deploy or whatever it might be. And then furthermore, you're in an aviation environment, which is inherently not inherently dangerous. There are dangers associated with it. So leaving the armed forces, you lost a lot of that stress. It's gone. And I think for me, the really important thing now is that I don't allow myself to build up stressful circumstances.
Yeah, that's great.
And I that can happen. It can quite easily happen where something doesn't go quite as you'd like it to with a client or a particular task that you've got to do, or something is not going well with an employee. And I'm normally the sort of person that will really sort of take that to heart and really let it sort of eat away at me, and I generate stress. And sometimes I just have to take a step backwards and think, hang on, why be stressed? These are actually, and it sounds very selfish, but sometimes you have to be like this as a bit of a defense mechanism. Sometimes you do have to look at things and go, actually, this is someone else's problem. It's my responsible to sort it out. Not my responsibility to try and help and assist and sort it out, and I'll do as well as I can. But ultimately, it's somebody else's problem. I can go home at night and compartmentalize, I suppose, and put that away. So that's quite a nice luxury. When you're in the armed forces, you can't do that.
No,
because you are in the service and you have a duty to perform.
and you're responsible for people. You fly with them. You know, I trust any of the guys. You know, 110% of the guys. One of the guys even flew my wife. You know, so it wouldn't have mattered which guy that was, and I genuinely mean that. I couldn't have cared which guy flew my wife. I trained most of them anyway. They wouldn't have been on the squad unless I trusted them. But it's interesting you talk about this this thing where you say, well, that's their problem. It's not my problem. I'm trying to do that a lot more now. And you see, we're in this outrage culture at the moment where people, you know, they have to, it's not good enough for them to kind of go, oh, I'm a bit offended by what that says in the paper. No, they've got to be outraged by it. It's like, and everyone has to know how outraged. It's not enough to just kind of go, oh yeah, I'm a bit upset, I'll go and deal with that myself. It's like, no, this is unfair, and I have to write an editorial, and I have to put it on. And we see that a lot. Well, it's probably a Trump thing as well, isn't it? And Brexit is showing the worst of the country now, as of course it is, and no one's standing behind the PM who picked up that thing from Cameron. And sometimes on Facebook, I used to get myself into a huge argument over Brexit, whatever, and now I'm like, you know what? If you feel that way about it, and you want to espouse that kind of opinion, well, that's great, and I wish you the best, but I'm not even going to bother, because I know where it puts me in a a mental state. I feel angry inside, and that anger becomes toxic, and then we get ill. It's actually something that Alfred Adler, who's a psychologist, used to work with Sigmund Freud. He called task separation. I'm pretty sure it's him. It's him or Jung or someone, but he would say these are tasks of other people that you need to separate yourself from. So it might be that you can see someone having an issue, but until they ask for your help, don't wade in there. You know, your brother's doing something or your sister's doing something, whatever you don't approve of. Don't reach in there and tell them how to do it. If they want help from you, they'll come and ask you, and then you can decide whether your help is the best for them or not, because it might not be, and you might say, look, I don't want to get involved here because, this, and also if you do help them all the time, then they never learn how to help themselves.
No.
And that's, you're actually doing themselves a disservice there. You're actually hurting them more than you would be if you just let them alone, let them work it out, and then next time they know how to cope with it. Yeah. So it's only really after leaving the service that I'm understanding what that task separation is, and actually how to do that in a responsible way so that it doesn't affect me, so that when I wake up in the morning, I don't feel angry and stuff, Yeah. And I think in the military, you're right, that you can't do that, because the mission goal, you're responsible for that. You have a part in that. And like on deployment, whatever it might be, I mean, when you're on a ship, you'd have been the probably one of the only pilots on that ship. I would have thought maybe there were 2 pilots and an observer or something. But, you've got to be involved in that. You don't have a choice to be involved in that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you're absolutely right. Lynx pilot on Type 23, Type 42, as was for me, and so on. Yeah, you're the only pilot, Aviation did not happen unless you got in the aircraft, and the whole ship is geared up towards it as well. It's not just the aircraft doesn't just nip off the back end without anyone noticing. The whole ship is involved in aviation to launch and recover the aircraft and everything else. So you can't get away from it. You can't just say, do you know what, flying tomorrow, someone else's problem.
It's interesting, yeah. I wonder whether, because we're not deep diving into this, and we obviously could, but we've gone an hour and stuff. I don't want to hold you forever, but it's interesting with the Navy and the Air Force and how the differences that I only went through flying training in the Navy. I never did the extra career that you did, but because you work, obviously I did sea time, I did fleet time, and I did initial sea training. But when you work on a ship, it's a ship's company, isn't it? I think they're on a 23. I'm going to throw figures out there because my time was on a Type 22, the Boxer in London. But there were, I think, 22 officers in the wardroom and about 200 ship's company. All men at the time. There were no women on the ship. I think HMS Sheffield was the first ship to get women in. About the same time we were at sea with her. So, but it's a ship's company that work together. And when you're firefighting and you do all the battle damage stuff that we did, I can't remember the terminologies. I do apologise, a long time ago for me. But you're all in Fear Naught suits, aren't you? And you don't know who's who. And you could have the captain stood next to you, and you could have, I remember it being a whole ship's company that put that ship to sea. In the Air Force, there is that divide. And I hate to say it because I still work with a lot of engineers from the Air Force today, and I still know a lot of engineers. But there was the officers that get in the airplane, and there was the engineers that service the airplane. And some days you never saw each other, And I don't want to deep dive into this, but it just makes me realise. I wonder whether that somehow works into the way you address people today, and maybe a way I address people. It's something for later, I guess. I don't know, but.
Interesting point.
Yeah, it's one of those things we think about it. Right, so what have we not covered on this thing? I don't want to keep you forever. So we did. I'm just going through my list of things now. You might have stuff on your one as well. Just going to cover the future real quickly, and then we'll just do that 10 minutes and go. Because obviously my future's happening. I'm not too sure what's going to be. What happens with Proudhouse now? Or what happens with you? You've got a family. I don't have a wife, but I don't have a family like yours. I guess you're more prioritised into them now than you ever were before. But what happens with... What are you doing with the future? You're going to carry on in the R&R for a bit?
Yeah, so I definitely see my career in the R&R, and I always tell people, by the way, in the R&R, I always say I see it as my second Navy career. I do. It's not just about turning up and seeing my old mates. There's progression, training, developing all the time as a reservist officer, and also learning more and more every time I attend about the Wildcat aircraft, which is completely, although it kind of looks a little bit like a Lynx in terms of the kit and the equipment, it's a completely different beast. So I'm really having to sort of put the time into learning that. So the R&R is definitely features in my career, I suppose, for the next few years to come. Hopefully, as long as they still want me. There's no guarantees there, but as it stands at the moment, that's all good. In terms of my business, we were talking about scaling up and so on. I'm the sort of person that likes developing and evolving. So in terms of my business, it's very much a plan, not necessarily to open a multi-office agency, but certainly to build and develop the services that we offer. So we're looking at moving into maintenance. So not just managing maintenance for rental properties, but also managing maintenance for anyone that perhaps doesn't want to necessarily deal with a tradesman. They might want to deal with an agent or a manager that can oversee, and understand, maintenance, perhaps on larger properties, and perhaps, builds and refurbishments and so on. And to do that requires me evolving and developing the database and the systems that we've got, needing more staff and so on. So that's the way I see the business going, is definitely growing and developing. For me to create freedom, you mentioned earlier about, for the work some of the work that you're doing at the moment, it's all about you. It's you standing up and giving a talk, or you being the consultant and so on. For me to get to a situation where perhaps my business is standing up truly in its own right, I need to, I think, evolve more, employ more people, develop and train more, and get to a stage where I can stand back and really properly manage the business without getting too involved in the day-to-day aspects. And I'm probably just transitioning into that phase at the moment. I'd like to think that in 2019, next year, I'm going to be not doing the day-to-day stuff. I'm going to be training, managing and developing my staff and the systems and the business plan. So that's on that side of things. But then the other thing as well is, family is really important. I've got, my wife, daughter, stepdaughter. We're in our new house that we moved to a couple of years ago, and there's that whole side of my life as well. And part of running your own business, one of the reasons why people want to do it is to give themselves the freedom to spend more time with family, or perhaps the flexibility to do things with the family that you might not have the opportunity if you were an employee. So it's very important to me that I start factoring in that, the time to do those sorts of things, instead of just being very entrepreneurial all the time and filling my time up, my diary up with appointments and this, that, and the other. I actually got to take time out and just remember there's a life out there. Stop and enjoy it. Because it will pass by in no time at all.
It does. And the thing is, I don't work 5 days a week now. Well, I kind of have to now in a way, because I've got another thing. But I try and have a 4-day, really big 4-day working week where I literally deploy from the house sometimes. I live in a hotel, hit it hard, and come back and take a 3-day weekend. And there's a lot of reading I've been doing online about businesses that do that. They do a 4-day working week, and they're so much more efficient than doing 5 days. Yeah. And a lot of it is because these meetings, everything we go to, and you get dragged in, and it's like, stop that. So I'm really trying to be more. Yeah. One of the pieces of advice I give to someone leaving the military is just take some time. Don't bounce military into commercial prime or whatever it might be, big company. Just take some time out and do something with it. Try and plan it if you can. But even if you can't plan it, it means you're drifting around the house, just fixing the house up. Just take some time until you get a bit bored. Reach out, try and find some jobs, have a few interviews, but don't rush. And just try and, because the military, I think, is this big thing. You leave, and then you're like, wow, actually, that was quite full on. Yeah. It's kind of almost, I'm not saying damaging in a way, but it is when you come out, you're like, I'm quite a big fan of trying to help people rejoin if it's the right place for them. But no one I speak to rejoins if they've been out for I don't think less than a couple of years. They really have to take some time to just decompress from the whole military experience. And when the younger generation, I really want to get in and fly airplanes, I'm like, that's a small part of your life inside the military. Yeah. There was a guy, Carl, on here recently. He's just joined the Navy. In fact, he's about to go down Dartmouth. A lovely guy, got in as observer. Real level-headed guy. And if you go back 2 podcasts ago, I think, or maybe 3, you'll find Carl. Really good to see young people joining up to the services that have thought it through that much and understand the implications of what they're doing. I get a lot of emails from guys and girls that have not done that. And so I always try and say, listen to these podcasts, read what I've written, and speak to people like yourself, and really try and find out what actually going into the services means. Because coming out, you have a full understanding of what it meant, and it's not as, what's the word I'm trying to? It's what we were talking about earlier about conformity and repression. It's not as open as a career as you think. It takes a lot of devotion, a lot of time, a lot of kind of mental and physiological strength, I suppose, in a way. And then when you come out, you think, well, I've kind of done that now. Maybe I need a bit of time to decompress and do something else. I appreciate your time because you are busy, and we didn't really go into anything else yet. And also, I have to say to people that you're my best man at my wedding, so it's like there is that kind of, you know what I mean? It's like I do know you a little bit, you know what I mean? There are some things that I would love to talk to you about, and we will have to talk about them in the future. But what I wanted to get out from you really was that entrepreneurial side of leaving the service, which is not really done by many people. What that means, what the problems that we have in there, and of course, looking at your past journey and everything, and understanding the fact that whatever we do within the military, it's all wrapped up in failure and recovery, that first attempt in learning. And we use that as we leave. We use it as we go into our professional lives outside the military. And I look now outside the military and I'm like, military is what I did. I did that for 20 years. Yeah, I wrote some stuff about it.
Yeah.
I'm forward facing on this now. I'm not looking behind me and trying to live off my past. And it's weird because fast jet performance, of course, that's how I'm known as. But it's about performance of the things we need in order to go into flying these airplanes. That's what I'm talking about. And what does that now mean in my transition out and my kind of future in civilian life? And I'm really focused in looking out and looking for opportunities where I can add some kind of value. And I think if you're always doing that, as you are doing to the people down there at Somerset with what you're doing with Proudhouse and stuff, then you're never really going to go wrong.
No. Yeah, absolutely.
Appreciate your time. Hour 15. That's not bad. Out of 15 of quality.
Been on the phone for a lot longer in the past.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing. We could just go on forever. And I'll leave this bit in because obviously I'm going to have to go in a minute. Whilst I've been on this, people have been calling me on the phone here because it's not live or anything. It's just when you work so many jobs, you get a lot of these, a lot of people calling. Of course, I work a day from home now. I think that's quite important to get a lot more done from home, as you can imagine.
Mate, I'm at home now, sat in my kitchen doing this. And the other thing as well, the weekend, I just bought a book called How to Be Bored, I think it's called.
Nice.
It's about, I'll send you the proper title. And I literally only read the first chapter so far. I only got it yesterday afternoon, but it is all about detaching yourself away from the phone and the distractions and WhatsApp and text messages, all these things that have an influence on your life.
Yeah.
And you end up spreading yourself so thin. You end up really building up your capacity such that you can do so much stuff. But by about 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, your brain's aching. You've got no capacity left for doing anything because you've not concentrated on just doing 2 or 3 or 4 quality tasks throughout the day. And I really recognise that. And that's where I'm at the moment, really, I suppose, as a business owner, is detaching myself away from all the distractions. I can do a bit of quality work. But anyway, you're absolutely right. Phones, contact.
Well, there was a thing I read recently about, I read an article on self-sabotage, and I've written one before, and it was a very similar thing to what I've written. Mine was more military focused, of course, was why students fail. But this was talking about we spread ourselves so thinly so that we don't have to achieve. We're not responsible anymore of achieving in those individual roles because we're only doing them for a little bit, right? So we can go, well, I'm only doing this for a little bit, so I don't have to commit too much to it. And what we're really saying to ourselves is, therefore, if I fail at that, it's not really my responsibility because I wasn't doing it full time. So, it's all right to fail. And I'm cautious and conscious, maybe the better word, of spreading myself too thinly. And also, I was reading something else about someone was saying you can really only do 3 90 minutes of chunks of work in a day. And if you think about it, that's 4.5 hours. Then there's 3.5 hours of emails, meetings, everything else. If you can put yourself down and say, right, shut your door, whatever it is you do, and go, I'm going to do this for 90 minutes, and I'm going to do 3 of these 90 minutes in one day, your productivity goes through the roof.
Yeah.
Because you plan it. Yeah. That's the thing.
I think testament to that as well is I take when I go on holiday each year, I have to take my laptop and my phone and a bit of work stuff with me. I simply can't go away for 2 weeks and just not be contactable at all. But after 2 or 3 days, the telephone stops ringing and the messages stop coming my way and the emails slow down because I have taken myself out of that sort of almost self-perpetuating process of generating messages and emails and communications and so on. And all I've done, because I've been on holiday, is the essential stuff that needed doing.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, actually, the world doesn't fall apart, you know.
It does. A lot of emails we get as well aren't. It's email, not immediate mail, isn't it? But they're not important. People are just trying to get some kind of warm stroke or something to say that what they're doing is okay. And I always say to people when they say, "Hey, I sent you emails, you never answered," I said, "If only I had a phone number, you know what I mean, that you could have called." That's at the bottom of the email trail. If only you could have used that number. Like if there was a magic number you could get me on.
Interesting though, because personal taste, I much prefer a short email because people spend so much time on the phone.
Yeah,
you know, I just want, if someone's going to call me, I want a quick message. Chris, can you do this? Or Chris, can you advise on such and such? Yeah, no worries. 2 minutes. But instead, you know, it's very nice. Clearly, I'm not being unfriendly. I'm just stating facts, really, that telephone calls can take 10 or 15 minutes when actually an email would be 2 or 3 lines to achieve the same thing. But it all depends on your style, I suppose, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I'm talking about if you're in an email thing and you're getting 3 or 4 emails from the same guy and you're not getting any response from you, it's like there's a reason for that. It's because I'm on the road or something, and just call me. You know, I spend a lot of time on the road, and it's a bit unfortunate because there's nothing else you can do on the road apart from drive and listen to podcasts or whatever. That's, you know, but you can't create at all. And obviously, I do a lot of creating things and writing and stuff like that. And I'm stuck in this vehicle. And
you don't have a chauffeur?
Well, you know, I was going to get one. I was going to get an au pair as well, but apparently you've got to have kids, so I'm not allowed to do that either. Rubbish life, yeah. So, but you're right. I need a chauffeur. So if I can work out a way of getting a cheap chauffeur, and I would honestly pay someone. I don't know how much you'd have to do it, but if they drove me for like 3.5 hours somewhere and then dropped me off, and it's obviously like a taxi or whatever, I wonder how much I'd pay someone to get that time where I could be in the back of the car doing what I needed to do. Like, you know when you get a train and you're like, all of a sudden on the train, you've got nothing else to do on a train, nothing apart from hit your emails, get your admin sorted. You know, I see people watching films on a train and stuff, and I'm like, I'd love to have that life where I could sit there and just, you know what I mean? But I don't. I've just got to, that's my admin time. I've got to get that admin done. Then again, of course, we have to make time for chilling as well. Just maybe on a train that's a really great opportunity. And when you're in a car, all I'm thinking of is I'm literally just driving. There's nothing else I can do. I'll work that out, but I'm just going to try and cost it up. Good business idea, couldn't it? Like cheap chauffeuring or something.
Yeah.
The net jets.
Yeah, perhaps there's an idea there. Yeah.
The net jets of cars type thing. Well, it's fractional ownership, isn't it? For, you know, because if you're going one way, if you're taking someone, say, to London, well, if there's someone else needs to get picked up in London later in the day to come back out to somewhere else, you just work out your network and I guess it is a chauffeur service we are describing.
Yeah, it's sort of toxic, isn't it?
We'd be rubbish at like Dragon's Den, wouldn't we? Yeah, so what you're trying to sell me, Tim, here is a chauffeuring company. Yeah, I guess. Yeah, that's rubbish. I think I should stick to the jobs I'm doing at the moment. Look, I really appreciate it. I'm going to chuck this out at some point, okay? But if people want to find you, Chris Chambers, Proudhouse Property.
Yeah, so
Somerset,
anyone can contact me, Chris, at proudhouseproperty.co.uk. If anyone in the armed forces wants to talk to me about setting up a business or just general advice about transitioning from life in the armed forces to Civvy Street, I'd be delighted to help them. And clearly, a quick plug for my business: we deal with property management and lettings of private residential properties. So if you've got a rental property, an HMO, a house in multiple occupation, or anything along those sorts of lines in the southwest, South Somerset, Dorset, Taunton, Bristol, Bath, those sorts of areas, then give me a shout because I can help. And I promise you, we'll be a lot better than your average high street agent.
Yeah, well, that's what your customers say, isn't it? Which I'm surprised at how poor the service is. And this is obviously why you're doing so well because it's incredible. Well, apart from the brilliance, I mean, it's the lack of brilliance for everyone else.
Well, one of my top tips for going into business is pick an industry that's got a lousy reputation and get into it.
That's great.
Actually, you stand a good chance of standing out.
That's a great tip for people, isn't it? I love that. That is brilliant. All right, look, well, I'll catch you soon. I'll give you a call during the week or something, okay?
Nice one. Cheers, Tim.
Blood family. Talk soon.
Yeah, bye.
Bye. I don't know how to turn this off.